minutes, 25 minutes. And then we will take public comment. And as a courtesy, then we'll then delay. Don't start us yet. We're not started yet. Okay, welcome to the study session for the Costa Mesa City Council for Tuesday, November 12th, 2019. I will now call the meeting to order. Would everyone please stand and join me for the Pledge of Allegiance? Please say with me, I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. City Clerk, may we please have the roll?
Thank you. Let the record reflect that all council members are present.
Okay, and City Attorney, do we have any closed session report?
I'm sorry. Thank you, Madam Mayor. Only direction was given in closed session.
Okay, we now will read into the record by the City Clerk the study session item.
Thank you. Review the general fund's fiscal year 2018-19 preliminary financial results, fiscal year 2019-20 pacing through September 30th, 2019, and status of deferred items from fiscal year 2019-20 budget adoption. And presentation by Ms. Telford, Finance Director.
Okay, great. And Ms. Telford is going to give the presentation, and then we're going to take public comment. Each speaker will be allowed 2 minutes at public comment. And if you could come to one of the two podiums when you speak and be ready, and then we'll go to the next speaker so that it can go quickly, because it looks like we have a lot of people here at our study session. And then we will close public comment, and then we'll take council comment. We aren't voting on anything here tonight. It's just an information session. Okay, Ms. Telford.
Good evening, Madam Mayor, members of the City Council. I will not be the only person presenting tonight. I've invited a number of my colleagues to present to you as well. Tonight we will be going over the fiscal year 18-19 general fund financial results that are still very preliminary at this time. We'll also discuss the projected ending fund balance. We'll go through the fiscal year 2019-20 general fund pacing through September 30th, which is our Q1 results. We'll also go through some of the deferred items that we were asked to bring back as a part of the budget adoption this past June, and then we'll go through some next steps. I want to go through some of the key points for the 18-19 general fund financial results. I can't stress enough that this information is very preliminary. You will probably hear me say that 10 times before this presentation is over. We are currently going through our annual financial audit. We do expect that to be completed at the beginning of December, but until then, there is the potential for numbers to change based on what the auditors, what questions they ask and things that they may find. For 18-19, the budget to actuals were more favorable than expected. I'm going to be candid. I was very happy about this. When we get to that slide, you will see why, but between the budget to actuals being more favorable and then our fund balance, we do expect to end much higher than we originally estimated, which I'm also very excited about. We did receive a large sum of one-time revenues, predominantly from sales tax, that helped us accomplish these two items. But we want to remain cautious as we move through fiscal year 19-20, and we also want to work to better understand recurring versus one-time revenues. Now let's go a little bit more into detail. In your packets, this is attachment 1 if you want to look at it a little bit closer. This slide compares the amended budget to the actual amounts received for fiscal year 18-19. I know you're going to look ahead. So if you look at that bottom line, we did we're anticipated to end the year a little more than $2 million over budget. For revenues, that's good. We were not anticipating this. It is predominantly because of the one-time revenues that we received for sales tax. We met with HDL recently to try to better understand where our estimates were off, and it turns out we think we did pretty good with the results of the Wayfair decision. I know the council will remember that ruling, but for the general public, this ruling now requires businesses with sales over 500,000, online sales over 500,000, to report sales tax based on point of delivery rather than point of sale. For Costa Mesa, we think this is going to be probably about $500,000 per quarter for us. Overall in the county pool, we saw a $700,000 increase just in the one quarter. The challenge, though, is the state is still trying to get caught up on their reporting, so we aren't able to 100% identify this increase being attributed to the Wayfair decision. Also, as we move into the next quarter, another round of implementations as a result of the Wayfair decision is going to start. So we should have better information coming from HDL when we report back to you at midyear. Another reason for the increase in the sales tax is because of luxury sales within the city. This is both in the luxury auto as well as luxury consumer goods. It has sustained through the following quarter. However, luxury sales do tend to be cyclical, so we're going to watch this one really closely. We've put it on our watch list with HDL to make sure that we can determine whether this will be ongoing or whether or not it will be one time and will kind of level back off in future quarters. Occupancy tax came in under budget by $975,000. The last couple of years have paced a little bit slower than we anticipated. We believe this is because of increased competition in the city, in surrounding cities that are drawing people away from Costa Mesa if they have hotel stays in the area. But I suspect another reason is because we were a little bit too optimistic in our estimates for 18-19. We had projected a pretty sizable increase, and we didn't have any new hotels that were anticipated. So we really need to take a look at that and maybe level back down to where we're actually, the actual revenues received. You'll see this as we move into the 19-20 section. We'll discuss it a little bit later. Marijuana gross receipt tax came in under budget by $1.4 million. At the end of the year, we had 6 marijuana operators that had come online. The 6th came online just at the end of the year. We did anticipate that there would be more operational before June 30th. There were some delays, unsure exactly what was causing those, but we did have a little bit of relief. If you look just a little bit further on the marijuana business permits and marijuana CUP, those came in about $450,000 over budget. The paramedic transportation program was a new program for Costa Mesa that started in September 2018. So this $3,050,000 that we received only represents 8 months of the year. 10 months of the year, I'm sorry, let me do my math a little better. It started September 1st in 2018. There were some questions whether we were going to be able to achieve our $3 million mark. I'd say we did a pretty good job. Another important item to note, this will be important as we get to 1920, this does include an allowance for doubtful accounts because some of the receivables that we have for these transports are not collectible. This particular revenue stream tends to have a higher uncollectability rate. That has been accounted for here. So these are the true dollars we expect to receive. Under the fees and charges for services line, we came in just under $700,000 over budget. This is primarily due to an increase in plan check fees that were approved as a part of the 18-19 budget adoption. We also did see a surge in revenues the last 5 months of the year, but we have taken a look forward and we have started to level back down. So that does look to be temporary. And again, in total, we received a little over $2 million more than our amended budget number, which is great news. If we move into the expenditures, this is where we came in $442,000 under budget. This is the number I'm actually really happy with. In May, when we were just getting ready to propose the 1920 budget, we undertook a detailed analysis to look at where we expected to end the year for budget to actuals. And I was almost certain we were going to go over budget by quite a bit. At that time, we jumped into action to try to figure out a plan. The finance department conducted detailed analysis and worked with the non-public safety departments, primarily because we knew public safety couldn't pull back. That's just not something that is a discretionary cost. So we worked with the non-public safety departments to identify areas where we could pull back to help the entire city come in under budget for the general fund. And I think we accomplished just that, which really drives home what I've been saying ever since mid-year. This is everyone's budget. It's not one department's budget. And we will continue that team approach as we move into the next fiscal year.
Bless you.
This slide shows transfers from the general fund to other funds. If the second line that you see here, the $8.5 million, that represents our capital asset needs set aside. That's an ordinance that council approved back in 2015 that allows for a set aside to be dedicated to capital improvements in the city. Council also approved the repayment of a loan from the general fund to the park fees fund, which when repaid, council approved setting that aside to help pay for the new land management system and the ERP system. So that transfer represents us moving it to the IT replacement fund for future use. We also created a new fund to operate as a holding tank when we bring the Section 115 trust for approval to City Council. We've already gone through the RFP. We've already made the selection. Now we're looking to bring contracts back to council in the very short future. The $3.29 million for the self-insurance fund, that represents the legal costs related to certain cases that council approved using general fund dollars for. The original estimate came in at $4 million. As you can see, we came in quite a bit under that, $700,000 lower than we were originally anticipating, which was great. We wanted to separate out the transfers to the homeless shelter because these were unanticipated. They were addressing a critical need and a pending lawsuit with the city. And most of them are one time. The $3.425 million represents a transfer for the acquisition of our site over on Airway. That also resulted in the purchase of an asset that will hold value. So it isn't money that's lost, it's money that's just been converted into a different kind of asset. And we do anticipate that that asset will hold its value into the future. The other $1 million transferred to the homeless shelter was for startup costs and for the first few months of operations that wasn't included in the original adopted budget. The transfers totaled $4.4 million for the shelter. Now, it's important to note that all of the items with the stars next to them, those are all one-time transfers. Those will not be recurring into the future, and that represents about $10 million in costs. And then I mentioned the asset that it holds value into the future. So what does all of this mean? We started the year with $55 million in fund balance. Revenues totaled $144 million. Expenses, including transfers, totaled $141 million. And at the end of the day, before transfers for the shelter, we had an operating surplus of $567,000. That means that had we not had those shelter costs, we actually would have had a net positive increase in fund balance. It was only after the shelter costs of $4.4 million that we had an operating deficit of $3.8 million. We do anticipate our ending fund balance to be $51.36 million. Again, much of this relates to that surge in sales tax, those one-time dollars that we weren't necessarily anticipating, plus coming in under budget with the expenditures that we tried really hard and successfully achieved. Again, very happy with this number. If you recall, preliminary estimates were in the $46.6 million range, I believe. So this is much, much better. It keeps us above the $50 million mark, which is definitely a success story. In this slide, you can see the fund balance history for the general fund dating all the way back to 2003. As you can see, fund balance tends to ebb and flow through the years. Sometimes it's related to economic changes. Sometimes it's related to priority changes with different councils. And this shows the $51.3 million estimated fund balance. You can also see, it won't let me point, here in this section, the economic committed reserve. This is the new fund balance policy that council had approved back in 2015 in hopes to increase general fund reserves to help stabilize us if there were economic declines. So to conclude the 18-19 preliminary financial results, again, they're preliminary, subject to change. The audit should be completed in the next month, and in January, we will present the audited financials to council. Budget to actuals and fund balance are more favorable and better than we were expecting them to be. We did receive a large sum of one-time revenues, which is why we will continue to remain cautious as we continue through fiscal year 19-20 to make sure that we're segregating out one-time versus ongoing revenues. This is all really good news. We were not anticipating being able to present such good information and good news to council tonight. So that leads us to our discussion about the pacing for fiscal year 19-20. The information presented is as of September 30th, where we would generally expect to have received 25% of revenues and spent 25% of expenses. But as you see in future slides, that can't always be followed as a general rule. Predominantly because we don't receive revenues and expenses level throughout the year. This is also very early to be presenting this information. Normally, we don't present financials to council until mid-year, which tends to be middle to end of February. So we present these with caution. That's, in certain cases, it's only 1 month of data, which we'll show. So let's move into revenues. For sales tax, currently we have, or as of September 30th, we've received 9% of sales tax budgeted. This is one of the areas that can be deceiving because July and August sales tax cash, the receipts that we received, actually belong to the prior fiscal year. So this only represents September, 1 month. Occupancy tax, very similar approach, but July belongs to the prior year, so this is 2 months worth of revenues. We actually are pacing okay for TOT, but occupancy tax does tend to be cyclical. So we're going to keep a really close eye on this as we approach mid-year to see how we're comparing year over year, to see if there's any possible adjustments that may come at mid-year. For the marijuana gross receipts tax, as I mentioned, we don't have as many operators online as of right now, as many as we had expected. We've only received 8% of the tax receipts so far of what was budgeted. There is a possibility we'll need to do an adjustment at mid-year to self-correct to a more realistic number that we'll receive. And we'll go over that in just a moment. For other revenues, this can also be deceiving. We've received 69% of our budgeted amount, but this represents the loan repayment from the successor agency to the city that is done in one lump sum in July of every year. This year it was just a little over $1 million. Similar with transfers in, this represents the transfer from the capital improvement fund to the general fund that was approved as the budget adoption in order to help close the operating deficit. Moving on to expenditures for the first quarter, we would again expect to have spent about 25%. In this area, that's very deceiving. The finance department prepaid the CalPERS unfunded liability payment for the year. This gets paid every year. I believe this is the 4th year that we've prepaid, and it was a total of $20 million that all posted in July. So that's causing all of the departments to pace higher than they ordinarily would. There are a few departments that are pacing under, like finance, for instance. However, we have a pretty significant number of vacancies right now that's helping to offset that pension payment. So right now, there isn't anything that really worries me. We've been working with the departments. We've implemented some new procedures in finance to help us monitor budgets more closely and more frequently. We rolled out our first set of reports this past, probably a few weeks ago for the first quarter, helping the department see what finance sees. And then we'll be meeting on those in the coming months to make sure as we approach mid-year, we're on track by the end of the year. So I wanted to include this slide to kind of talk through what may be coming as we approach mid-year. As I mentioned before, it's really early to be projecting where we expect to finish the year out. But we're already looking at where 18-19 ended, where we're pacing for 19-20, and whether or not we may have some adjustments to make it mid-year, some up, some down. This really is a sneak peek, if you will, at what the city manager and I have been discussing for possible adjustments to come. As you can see, we are expecting an increase in sales tax. I may be a little too conservative, so hopefully the numbers are better at mid-year. But I do think we may need to pull back a little bit in the areas of transient occupancy tax and the marijuana gross receipts tax. For the marijuana business permits, we've already received the full amount budgeted, so we do expect to propose an adjustment to increase that estimate. And then in the fees and charges for services, a few revenue lines, we've also received the full amount budgeted already. So we are looking closely at how we're trending and do anticipate bringing some amendments back to council for consideration at a future date. So now that you've seen where we anticipate ending fiscal year 18-19, and you see how we're pacing as of September 30th, 2019, let's move on to some of the deferred items that council asked us to bring back when we closed out the first quarter. The first deferred items relate to staffing changes. There were 3 items that were deferred. One was the finance department's financial analyst. And as you recall from last week, finance department asked for this position to be changed to a budget and purchasing manager, which was approved at the last council meeting. So this item is no longer being requested. But during the budget process, we had also recommended converting 3 part-time code enforcement officers to 2 full-time, and taking 2 part-time positions in IT and converting those to a full-time position. I've been discussing those needs with IT and development services, and we do still believe that these positions are critical. Now I'd like to hand it over to Steve Ely, our IT director, to discuss the needs of the IT department. Steve?
Thank you, Kelly. The IT position being proposed is the first step in addressing IT needs and is the first of a series of requests that are the result of the IT strategic plan. As you know, the city has some catching up to do as it relates to technology, and everything the city does requires some involvement from IT. Currently, the department has been severely understaffed, and while we are doing everything we can to stay on top of things, it comes at a price. Sometimes things take longer than they should because there are only so many staff. As the city embarks on technology improvements, specifically those identified in the IT strategic plan, we will need to address the lack of resources in the department, not only to implement these systems, but to maintain them as well. The IT strategic plan is tentatively scheduled to be presented at a study session early next year. Other needs will be brought forth for consideration at that time. It is also important to note that this position will help the IT department address City Council Goal number 3, keeping the city fiscally sustainable to address our long-term obligations as well as immediate needs, and goal number 6, good government and community engagement.
Thank you, Steve. Now I'd like to hand it over to Jennifer Lee, Assistant Development Services Director, to discuss the needs of the Development Services Department.
Thank you, Kelly. The code enforcement changes being considered tonight would address a challenge the department has been facing for quite some time. As you are aware, code enforcement has been working with the state to shut down illegal marijuana dispensaries, and has also been working hard to address the negative impacts of unpermitted sober living homes and other group homes throughout the community. Both tasks are directly related to the City Council's top-tier priorities. These tasks are not traditional code enforcement activities and have required specialized training for our staff to be able to tackle these more complex issues. The proposed staffing change would take 3 part-time positions and convert them to 2 full-time positions. A large portion of our code enforcement staff are part-time. It has cost the city considerable time, money, and productivity over the years to hire and train and retrain part-time code enforcement officers. After being trained, many part-time employees move on to other municipalities that can offer them full-time employment opportunities. This then starts a new hiring training cycle that creates inefficiency and requires additional training costs moving forward. We believe that converting these positions to full-time will help us to retain talent, improve consistency and efficiency, and ultimately help development services better serve the community. These code enforcement officers will help development services achieve council priority number 1, keep our community safe by improving staffing in code enforcement so that we can continue to address the secondary impacts of sober living homes and our enforcement efforts against illegal marijuana dispensaries.
Thank you, Jennifer. Now that we know we ended fiscal year 18-19, or we project to end fiscal year 18-19 better than anticipated, we feel confident that approving these new positions is still a sound recommendation. As I previously mentioned, the Finance Department's requests were approved at the last council meeting. If the IT Department and Development Services Department's requests are approved, this is anticipated to increase the city's costs for fiscal year 19-20 by about $14,000, which the departments do believe they can absorb into their budgets. Moving on to the second deferred item, the Police Department's requests. During the fiscal year 18-19 budget adoption, the Police Department made a number of technology requests that totaled nearly $4 million. These are included over the next 3 slides and are in priority order. The Police Department and Finance Department have been working closely since that time to research outside funding opportunities, including grant funding and equipment financing to help fund these requests. Now I'd like to hand it over to Captain Glass to describe these items in further detail.
Thank you and good evening. As Kelly mentioned, we've been discussing the items requested by the PD and how to fund them over the last several months. As a result of those conversations, Finance and the Police Department have developed a 3-year implementation plan to fund the Police Department's most critical requests. We believe a phased approach will allow the city to address how to pay for these items as well as set a realistic goal for implementation. First item we addressed was the highest priority item we thought for the city, the mobile command vehicle. The MCV was previously approved and appropriated by council in fiscal year 17 and 18, and it is intended as a citywide asset that will operate as a command hub for emergencies such as earthquakes, structure fires, SWAT callouts, major incidents, investigations, DUI checkpoints. Will also be used as a large-scale community events such as Orange County Fair, Orange County Marathon, and the Charters Training Camp. The police department was ready to purchase this item in fiscal year 18-19. However, when we were ready to purchase, Finance identified a structural deficit in the equipment replacement fund, requiring the identification of an alternative funding source. Since then, we've been looking at the funding options, including grants, leases, loan financing, and cash reserves. One challenge we have recently identified is the cost increases due to the delays and changes in technology. New estimates to outfit the MCV for all of the city's needs is approximately $1.5 million. With this in mind, we've been focusing on grant funding or outside financing as a way to purchase this item. At this time, the finance director is recommending we finance the MCV where we can obtain at an estimated 2.35%, which I'm told was a good rate for this finance and this purchase. If financed over 10 years, the total cost would be approximately $1.8 million. And we would recommend purchasing this item this year, and payments would not begin until the following fiscal year. The next item on our list is the mobile command vehicle storage bay. This will not be needed until we receive the mobile command vehicle, which would be about 6 months after we place the order. This would be built in the fiscal year 2021 CIP budget for funding. Next, the 17 vehicles. As we discussed these items, we looked at the 17 vehicles and identified challenges with placing this many vehicles into service in 1 year. We discussed having a systematic replacement of at least 5 new vehicles each year to address immediate needs and phase vehicles into the fleet systematically. This worked previously when the department went to the Ford SUVs. It's practical and ensures we are able to replace high mileage vehicles annually. L3 is our in-car video system. Since 1998, our department has had an in-car video system. The current system was put into place in 2013, and it has hit end of life where we are experiencing problems keeping the system functioning properly. Our officers do not wear body cameras, so these in-car cameras are critical to recording incidents and activities in the field. It is also used in our interview rooms. The entire system needs to be replaced, which includes cameras in the vehicles and the technology platform in the PD. IT has also identified this as a high priority and determined the system is at end of life. We discussed a phased approach to implementing this item, but the system is too outdated and will not work with newer technology being implemented. It must be replaced at one time. In talking with Finance Director Telford, the city received a substantial amount of one-time sales tax revenues in fiscal year 18-19, and we ended the year much better than anticipated. The Finance Department and the Police Department are recommending appropriating a little over $1 million for these one-time funds to pay for the items I've mentioned. So going to the next slide is the list of items that are left over, which include our mobile data computers, CCTV, digital image management system, drone program, CSI equipment, drag dictation software, and personal protective equipment. The MDCs, the mobile data computer systems in department vehicles, are in a similar state as the L3 system. Purchased in 2013, they are now outdated and in need of replacement like the L3 Like the L3 system, the system would need to be replaced at once rather than a phased approach. We are proposing we accomplish this after the L3 system. It allows us, again, systematically accomplish these 2 large projects while ensuring the L3 system is done properly and not overburdening staff. The CCTV, this is the department's internal surveillance and security system. We were able to identify another funding source, asset forfeiture, for this item, and in December this year, the item will be brought to council for approval to appropriate funds and purchase the system. DIMS, the Digital Imaging Management System, is another priority for the department due to digital image retention, security, and management. We are attempting to use a JAG grant towards this item. If it meets the grant requirements, which we are optimistic on the grant, it'll be over a 3-year plan. If not successful, we are looking at other funding options to purchase this. Drone program. As a department, we proceeded on this purchase of the 3 drones we have identified for the program, and we are using AB 109 funds for this purchase. It's already proceeding. CSI equipment update. This is to update our CSI equipment to current technology for DNA collection and investigations. We are looking to see if a JAG and Proposition 69 funds could be used towards this. So again, we are looking at other resources to use to pay for this. Dragon dictation software. We recently purchased this software with AB 109 funds, and it is currently being implemented at the department as we speak. And then finally, the personal protective equipment. And at this time, we'd like to defer on this item. This is being evaluated to see what other agencies are doing with it, to ensure everyone understands what we are talking about. This is the chemical and biological protective suits we issued to staff back in 2009. These items were purchased through a fiscal year 08-09 Homeland Security Grant Program, and it was a countywide initiative back in the day. Since then, different agencies are doing different things in regards to these suits because they are coming up on their expiration date, and some are not issuing them more. So again, it is the body suit, gloves, and the hazard suit they put on. We still issue out protective masks and the everyday protective gear that are required in the field.
Thank you, Captain Glass. As you can see from the totals at the bottom of this slide, the total list comes to a little over $4 million, many of which these items have already been purchased or we're moving forward on. In the proposed 3-year implementation plan, the city is proposing equipment financing for the mobile command vehicle in the current year and is also proposing appropriating $1.125 million for the purchase of the L3 in-car video and moving forward with the purchase of 5 vehicles in the 1920 fiscal year. In year 2, fiscal year 2021, we anticipate appropriating $1.185 million for the construction of the mobile command vehicle storage bay, the mobile computers, the MDCs, and an additional 5 vehicles. This year would also start the annual payments for the financing for the mobile command vehicle. In year 3, fiscal year 21-22, we anticipate appropriating $410,000 for 5 more vehicles and the continued payment of the mobile command vehicle. We are still eagerly searching for grant opportunities to try to exhaust all outside funding sources available. We anticipate bringing the staffing recommendations and the police department recommendations back to City Council to take action on December 17th. Next steps. There is still a need to address increasing costs anticipated in the coming years. We need to be proactive in looking for ways to address these costs. In the coming months, we will be working with the Finance and Pension Advisory Committee to evaluate possible ballot measures, increasing revenues, and any other possible source that we can to address these costs. We have already begun the citywide fee study and will be bringing those recommendations to City Council in the spring, but it is also important to continue identifying revenue-generating measures. As we have said time and time again, our goal is to eliminate taxpayers subsidizing businesses in the community. The annual audit is expected to conclude in early December, and we will be presenting those results to City Council in January. We will also be reevaluating the fiscal year 1920 as we close December, and will bring back recommendations to City Council in February as a part of our normally scheduled mid-year review. We also plan to reevaluate the 5-year forecast at that time or earlier if time permits. We would also like to look at possible strategies to address any projected shortfalls so we can be proactive as we start the fiscal year 2021 budget development process. This concludes our presentation, and we are available for questions.
Thank you. Excellent presentation. Thank you all, and thank you for collaborating and partnering together to bring forward this great news. Okay, at this time, we are going to hear from the public. If you'd like to speak to an item, please come to one of our two podiums, and we'd ask that you sort of line up, and each speaker will be given 2 minutes, and Ms. Green is the timekeeper.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The cannabis industry comes in peace, but without patience. Madam Mayor, by a quiet show of hands, if I could ask those in the cannabis industry to please raise your hand and demonstrate you're a cannabis business owner, perhaps an employee that is in support of reducing the cannabis tax from 6% to 2% and introducing the new use of home delivery at a tax rate of 5%. Thank you. Never before has the cannabis industry been so united, seeking specific action of the City Council quickly. A year ago, several members met with the City Council and staff to share the challenging economics of a 6% tax, that the tax needed to be lowered. You'll hear testimony from the foreshadowing became a reality and that business use was closed, bringing the tax contribution to zero. The city receives 100% of nothing, a significantly less in total from that operator. Another will speak about how under the current tax burden, in his model, the city makes more money than that business. Another will speak about the perspective of a testing lab, which is a necessary foundational use and vital use in the city's ecosystem. They've not all opened, they've chosen other cities to operate in. Madam Mayor, this is a discussion of the budget. Measure X was a voter initiative approved by voters in 2016, 3 years ago, yet we have too few open after 3 years. Those that are open cannot compete with the current tax burden. Others chose not to open. Others are choosing to use other cities with more favorable tax rates to operate within, and have moved businesses outside of Costa Mesa. Currently, Costa Mesa operators are seeking facilities in other low-tax cities and plan to move the business to a more favorable tax rate. Properties in the Measure X zone, which once had multiple competing bids, now sit vacant. What we're asking for, you can work harder, work smarter, or lower your expectations. What we heard from the city is they're going to lower their expectations. We'd like to work together and make those revenues what they should be. We're looking for specific action, either December 17th or early in January. Thank you.
Thank you. And just as a reminder, we welcome all your comments, but I want to make sure everyone here knows that we're not voting on anything tonight. We're not actually making motions or anything like that. That's all coming in December. Okay, so you'll have to come back in December.
Thank you. Madam Mayor, Mayor Pro Tem, and City Council and staff, yesterday I sent a letter to you on behalf of the cannabis community requesting a reduction in the gross receipts tax to 2%, as well as to have taxation occur upon exit of product from the city. We also request the city allow for the introduction of home delivery businesses to be taxed at 5%. After having run a manufacturing distribution facility in Costa Mesa for over a year now, I can confidently tell you that 6% tax is not sustainable for growth. Several months ago, we opened our books to share some numbers with members of city staff and council to illustrate how detrimental that 6% really is. Since then, we've been forced to abandon our distribution to retail business model as customers were choosing to go with distributors located in other municipalities with much more favorable tax rates. We're seeing this exact same trend on manufacturing now. The industry is evolving. There are many new challenges that have arisen for us operators. One is that there's not enough legal retail outlets, causing a bottleneck of product at the dispensary front and discouraging consumers from shopping at legal, convenient outlets. The consumption of legal cannabis has decreased while consumption of illegal cannabis has increased. This bottlenecking has impacted the rest of the supply chain, and we have seen wholesale pricing drop along with our margins. Additionally, the capital costs to start a business in this industry are very high. While many of us budgeted for this, none of us were prepared to withstand the extremely lengthy licensure process with months of delays, nor were we prepared to begin operating in a market that is still dwarfed by the illicit market. We have continually lost customers and continue to lose customers to competitors in cities with more favorable tax havens because we just can't compete on pricing. There is, however, an opportunity for the city to place a higher gross tax on home delivery businesses. The state has already legalized this process, and home delivery would allow patients with direct access that need direct access to this medication to be able to have it, and it would also allow the city to regulate this and tax it. In summary, there are operational cannabis businesses in danger of closing their doors. We are asking for your help so swift action can be taken on these matters. Thank you.
Good evening, Madam Mayor and Mayor Pro Tem and the council members. My name is Stephen Hellings. I'm president of SW Ventures. We are a manufacturing site due to open probably in the next 4 to 5 weeks. We focus on large wholesale transactions. What we found is with the current market trends, it is becoming very quickly an extremely competitive market to be in the cannabis wholesale business. With some of our models based upon a 6% gross receipts tax, we are making less in gross profit than the city. So the city would be taking in about $360 per liter of distillate, and we would be making about $300 of distillate. And that's gross profits. That's before we pay our employees and we pay other expenses. So we believe that we need to have a modification of that because we're unfortunately competing with other cities that either have a zero tax or 2% tax. I know that you can probably discount the 0% tax perhaps because of geographical location being out in the desert, but in terms of right next door, about 20 miles north, we have LA County, which is at 2%. And when you start penciling out these numbers, we're talking significant cost savings that our competitors can have against us, and they're just as local to the thriving market, which is Los Angeles and Orange County. So we're looking for, we believe that we can build a very strong business. And even if you lower the tax, we have significant contracts that we can fulfill, but we need to be able to make money fulfilling those and at the large volumes that we're pushing out. So we're respectfully asking that you can meet with any of us. We're more than open to open the books and show you these figures. And we have sort of contracts waiting on this. Otherwise, we have to take action and start looking at potentially moving some of our manufacturing out to other locations in order to make this business model work. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor Foley and the council members. We appreciate you having us. We are from Yummy Karma. We're an all-female manufacturing facility operating in the green zone. Most of our team is here tonight. I want to start by saying that this city is our home. We love living here. We love working here. You've all made us feel so comfortable, and we really appreciate that. When we made the decision to go after a license, Costa Mesa was a place to be for cannabis. We had manufacturers and distributors all competing for real estate and licenses. We dreamed about collectively with you guys what this would look like in a couple years. And unfortunately, here we are. None of us could have predicted this outcome. Manufacturers and distributors are operating in other cities with lower taxes and just waiting until their leases run out in Costa Mesa. It's a sad thing to see. While other people in the industry here were operating here, they wonder how we're making it. And the truth is, we really aren't. We've cut wages. We have a hiring freeze. We're not sponsoring community events anymore. We'd love to pay you the 6%. And a year ago, we really did think that was possible. But with all of the illegal shops and the landscape of cannabis right now, it just isn't working. Here's how this affects us. We buy our raw materials from an operator within the city that's here tonight. It's subject to city taxes. Then we turn it into our products and we sell it to our distributor, Soul Distro, which is again subject to city taxes. And then when they sell it to our retailer, the same product outside of the city, again, it's subject to city taxes. So we're getting hit by all angles. And the way things stand, there's no incentive for us to do inner-city commerce. It's actually to our disadvantage. That 4% would give us an opportunity to grow, hire more people, and get ready for the surge that we all know is right around the corner if you can just work with us. Even if it's just temporary, we know good things are on the horizon. Thanks so much for hearing us.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and to the commissioners, to the council members, thank you. My name is Lori Glauser. I'm now a resident of Costa Mesa. I moved here last year in 2018 to open a cannabis testing lab. We were attracted to the Costa Mesa's green zone primarily because of the number of processors and distributors that were proposed to operate right at our doorstep, and it's a great location to attract the dozen or so experienced chemists and biologists that we need to run the lab. Since being awarded our provisional CUP last year, we've been patiently awaiting a time when the economics of putting a lab here in Costa Mesa would be feasible. Unfortunately, more than a year after we moved into our location on Cadillac Drive, the path to profitability is still unclear. Instead, we've been focusing on operating in Berkeley, where the tax rate is considerably lower, and we've been looking at properties in locations like LA and Palm Desert. Further, even our prospective clients right here in Costa Mesa will be incentivized to test with labs in other nearby communities that are not subject to that tax. So while the net effect of reducing taxes for cannabis labs may reduce the direct sales tax of around $100,000 per year, it would be offset by us bringing in 10 or more high-tech jobs into the area whose local spending would help offset any reduction in taxes. The second reason we're not yet operating here is really the lack of demand for legal product. We face intense competition from the unregulated, untested market. Many consumers still buy less expensive, untested product that's widely available from the unregulated market. So as a result, our market is only about 1/4 what we anticipated that it would be when we initially submitted our CUP license. Cannabis consumers can buy product for 30% less down the street. So you're probably aware of some of the recent deaths you've heard about with the vape lung disease. We haven't seen a lot of deaths due to cannabis, but we are now starting to see some adverse reactions to vaping, and our test lab tests for that type of thing. So thank you very much for your consideration.
Hi, good evening. I have a suggestion about maybe when this is less preliminary to give the balances of all the funds, not just the general fund, because there might be more stuff going on. You put it in one and take it out from the other. So I think it gives a more complete and more clear picture if you have what's going on with all of them. And then I think what we need to see too is the detail for internal service funds, the equipment replacement and self-insurance. These have specific definitions, and I've been coming up here for years talking about that. I think sometimes the city gets creative about how funds from those, how money from those funds is being used. And so I think that would be helpful to see. And then I have a question about the mobile command unit. So in 17-18, the council did vote to budget $900,000 towards this mobile command unit, and if I remember correctly, like $450,000 was from pile of the money from vacancies, and $450,000 was from somewhere else, but that money was budgeted. So if I understood correctly, there was a structural deficit or a structural something with the equipment replacement fund, which I'm not sure, but that to me sounds like there just wasn't really enough money to be doing what we needed to be doing. And the question would be why, and that's why we need to be looking into the weeds and into the details. Because if what we're wanting to do is finance it out and pay $300,000 in interest over 10 years over something that was already in the budget, and then it's kind of you vote for it to be spent on one thing, then you spend it on something else, but then we finance it, so it's kind of a problem. Okay, thank you.
Hi. As some of you may know, I'm an attorney. I work with cannabis clients throughout the state and a couple in the city and many other places. And I just wanted to, first of all, second everyone who spoke regarding the tax issue. One other thing I would just state, just from like a bigger perspective, what I see like throughout the state and certainly here at Costa Mesa, I just see a system both on the state and local level that like leads to the opposite goal of what I think most of us want, which is to move everything from the unlicensed market to the licensed market. There's obviously a variety of reasons why we want to do that. We've seen it with the vape issue, with product safety for consumers. There's obviously the revenue issue for both the state and local, that we don't get the revenues expected if consumers are still in the unlicensed market. So what I would suggest beyond the taxes is we obviously have unlicensed businesses still in this city and pretty much everywhere else in Orange County, and there's a variety of reasons for that, but I think one of the biggest is there just aren't enough cities where different types of activity are legal. Right now, the only city in all of Orange County, and if you expand even regionally beyond Orange County to adjacent areas of LA and San Diego counties and the Inland Empire, there aren't very many places either. The only city where retail is currently legal is Santa Ana, which obviously is not a viable option just geographically alone for a lot of people, and there's obviously financial reasons as well. So what I would suggest, this is a state where anyone can deliver into, based on current state law, into any jurisdiction. I would just suggest that this city might want to consider allowing at least delivery licensing, both for revenue generation and to help shut down the unlicensed market and move things into the licensed market like we want it to be. Thank you so much.
Thank you. So just as a reminder, and for those of you who are new, please don't touch the microphone because then it makes it really fuzzy and you can't really hear you very well. Sorry, I was trying to sign language to you, but you didn't understand me.
Good evening. I'm speaking for myself and not FIPAC. Appreciate staff and council for the quarterly review. Revenue forecasts remain flat with sales tax up, TOT and marijuana tax down. The reduction of the forecast is cannabis sales tax revenue is about 50%, equating to about 10.7 million of sales. On the flip side, forecast for marijuana business permit revenue has been doubled, up 100%. Why what appears to be opposite forecasts for the same industry? I understand that expenditures are not linear throughout the year. I originally had an issue or question, concern about police and fire because they're substantially over the rough benchmark of 25%, and possibly the explanation of the pension payment explains all of it. I do have a concern that I've expressed to members on the dais before, and that's for overtime. Is overtime a risk at this point in time? Also, at the last council meeting, staff brought up needing additional funding for legal expenses. Are there other potential expense risks out there? This review does not include capital projects. There are already financial issues with capital projects. I think staff deserves credit for dealing with the police budget issues in what I think is a sane and realistic approach. However, the L3 video system in the vehicles, staff is proposing using one-time sales tax. That's good marketing, but put it another way, using reserves for those expenditures. Mobile Command Vehicle Center, as noted, previously approved by council, but we need a good explanation of why that cost has increased 50% in 3 years. Thanks.
Thank you. Okay, this will be our last speaker. If you'd like to speak, please come to the podium. Otherwise, this will be our last speaker.
Hi, my name's Chris Shepard. I own a facility here in Costa Mesa. We're not operating yet, and I also own a second facility in Adelanto. In Adelanto, the tax rate is 1%, which, as you know, is substantially less than most cities out here. 6% tax rate is some of the highest rates that you guys have seen out there that everyone has seen. A lot of times that represents more than the profits that these companies are taking in. 2-3 years ago, everybody thought this would be a green rush where profits were abnormal profits. That's not the case. Supply has grown so much and demand hasn't been as high as everyone expected. So companies are just struggling to get by. There's a shakeout occurring right now where companies are being closed down and have filed bankruptcy and got out of the business, especially a lot of distributors. And so for the city of Costa Mesa at a 6% rate, it's going to be extremely difficult to keep any cannabis operators in business here. My lease, I got 3 years left on the lease, and at a 6% rate, I would not be renewing at those numbers. And regarding any expansion, I would focus more on my Adelanto facility to allow it to grow than here because of the tax rate being so high and unable to sustain that. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Okay, we'll close public comment. Thank you, everybody. And before we go to council questions, Ms. Telford, could you address the questions raised by Mr. Taboda as well as Ms. Verska, who are both on our FIPAC committee?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I will attempt to. I could not write fast enough. Ms. Verska brought up questions about the balances of the other funds. Those will be forthcoming as we complete the audit, because the focus of this meeting really was on the deferred items, not so much on the final results. We wanted to bring back what was relevant during this meeting. So we'll bring those back in January when we present the final audited numbers. She mentioned information on the internal service funds and the structural deficits that we mentioned in the presentation. This is something that was discussed during the 1920 budget adoption. When I started as the finance director a little over a year ago, there was a lot of digging in and really trying to understand the numbers and how we account for things. And one of the things that I had identified was challenges with the cash balances. Wasn't necessarily anything having to do with appropriations or what was budgeted. It was related to the money that was actually there. There had been some accounting that wasn't necessarily done correctly in the past over quite a few number of years. We were not fully billing out the costs of the internal service funds, which meant we were artificially depleting the cash that should have been on hand to purchase vehicles that were in need of replacement. We were also buying new vehicles using the cash that was in that fund, where the cash is solely for the purpose of replacing existing vehicles, not for the acquisition of new ones. In 17-18, the council did approve the appropriation for the mobile command vehicle. Half of the money, if I remember correctly, 50% of it was transferred from the general fund into the internal service fund, the equipment replacement fund. The other half was coming from cash already there. But because of these accounting issues that had happened over the years, it essentially depleted the cash that was supposed to be used for the mobile command vehicle. We ended the year in a deficit position for cash. So that is a challenge that the finance department needs to roll up our sleeves and take on and really try to identify solutions going forward, because that's going to pose some challenges for the replacement of all of our fleet, not just for the mobile command vehicle. That's a part of why we are recommending using or appropriating general fund dollars for the purchase of the first year of 5 vehicles, because we don't have that solution yet. That's a much bigger project.
And can I follow up? And then you will take that, now it will be clearly articulated for those of us who don't see the back end, what is equity versus what is cash when we're budgeting, so we would know
Correct.
there's a red flag area.
I think that was one of the misconceptions from the previous finance department. When looking at the budget, we tend to focus on fund balance. However, for our internal service funds, which for Costa Mesa is the equipment replacement fund, the self-insurance fund, and the IT replacement fund, those are the 3 funds that you can't use equity because they hold assets. For instance, the equipment replacement fund holds the asset of over 250 vehicles. Well, those vehicles end up being equity until they're fully depreciated. It's misleading. I believe that in previous budget conversations, the equity balance, I think it was somewhere in the 6 million range. I don't have my book in front of me. It was interpreted as cash, but it is not spendable cash. It's an asset. You're not going to sell a brand new vehicle to buy another brand new vehicle. Mm-hmm. So we're looking at correcting that. We've already corrected the internal service billings for 18-19. And we've corrected them in the budget for 1920 so that it doesn't exacerbate the issue. But now we have to figure out the solution to what's been happening for years and years.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Okay, we have 3 council members in the queue. Mayor Pro Tem Stevens, now 4.
Okay, so I have a lot of, well, not a lot, don't get too worried about it. I've got several questions. I just want to talk to the folks in the cannabis industry first. I appreciate that Mr. Fitzpatrick said he comes in peace, considering the alternative, but without patience. And I just want to tell you, thank you for all of you for being here, and thank you to Mr. Fitzpatrick and many other people in the cannabis industry for interacting with me about this issue over about the last year. It's been a journey for this industry because, it was voted in 2016, and then there was the process of going through the approvals and the permitting and what did that all look like. And that was very expensive. And then the process of getting people approved and the first time you do that, it's very difficult. And then within about the last year, we've, I think, gotten a lot of feedback that the tax structure is not appropriate. I'm very receptive to that, and I'm convinced, quite honestly, that adjustments need to be made. And I think we need to move forward quickly because the industry has been patient. One of the things that hasn't been brought up by any of the speakers is there's an additional burden. They mentioned the cost and the difficulty getting through the permitting process and the local tax and the competition with the illicit market and the lack of basically a retail supply channel to their local customers. But also the federal government, a lot of people don't know this, but there's a provision in the tax code, 26 USC 280E, which, because cannabis is still a Schedule I drug, prevents these companies from deducting for federal tax purposes, income tax purposes, any of their expenses. So they're basically taxed from a federal income tax on the top line revenue. And that's like no other business that's not a Schedule I business. So they have a lot of challenges, and I think if we can reduce their challenges, I think that makes a whole lot of sense, and to do it quickly and move forward. And I know it's a burden, but I think Mr. Fitzpatrick said 100% of nothing is nothing, and 6% of nothing is also nothing. So it all adds up. If you got nothing, you got nothing. So we do need to deal with that. Now, on to the questions I had on the presentation. Ms. Telford, you said that these numbers were very preliminary, but then you also said that we're going to have a audit completed in about one of the first couple weeks of December. So with an order of magnitude, I mean, it seems like these aren't very preliminary. They might change by some amount, but they're pretty close, right?
So I can tell you that they've already changed by $183,000 in the positive.
Right.
But they continue to go up and down small amounts. I don't suspect they're going to change significantly. We received an email from our auditors last week with a few final questions that I don't think will raise any questions about the numbers. I think it's more them documenting for their own work papers. But you never know. The one thing that we haven't gotten through yet is the results of any pending and threatening litigation that will be in the attorney letters. Those letters are due back, I believe, in the next week or so. So that could potentially increase, but that is usually for the self-insurance fund, not for the general fund.
Okay, I got it. So order of magnitude, something in the 6 digits, 1 comma, first number beginning with 1 or 2, something like that.
Something like that.
Okay, yeah, that's right. I pin people down for a living. So the other thing too is you said regarding the Wayfair decision that these were dollars that were not anticipated, and then you said, I think that we're expecting roughly $500,000 per quarter to come in. So the way I interpreted what you said is this is the last time that these numbers will be unanticipated, but they're going to continue to flow in the future, but we will just anticipate them, correct?
Correct. When we received the initial estimates from HDL, they were estimating $5 per capita, which for Costa Mesa is a little over $500,000. That was built in to some of the projected increases that we received from them as a part of our mid-year review when we look at sales tax. However, for Costa Mesa, we do think that this is maybe a little bit too conservative. The preliminary estimates coming in from HDL are likely to be significantly higher. The county pool payment that we receive increased by over $780,000. That's a pretty sizable increase when you look at the fourth quarter, which for us is April through June, compared to the fourth quarter from the previous year. The one thing that's unknown is how much of that is truly attributed to this point of delivery sales tax versus point of sale. There is a second round coming with implementation. There's another piece of the implementation. So while that first piece was unanticipated, in the current adopted budget numbers for sales tax for 1920, there is built-in revenue for the anticipated revenue stream from Wayfair. I believe it's going to be underestimated when we come back at mid-year. That's a part of why we think we're going to need to do an adjustment up. So those numbers, it's really more to come at this point because we just don't have any solid information.
Okay. Regarding the 115 trust fund, can you explain just very briefly why it's better to establish a 115 trust fund and commit that money to a fund as opposed to, if we have the money, paying it to PERS, paying down our underfunded liability? Could you do it briefly?
So I wouldn't say that it's better. There are numerous options to choose when trying to identify solutions to address either the unfunded liability or the increasing pension costs on an annual basis. A number of years ago, the city made the the FIPAC committee made the recommendation to council to set up a Section 115 trust. That is really more of a rate stabilization. So when I started, I continued down that path. I think that's something that's more of a consideration from a global perspective of whether or not the city believes it's prudent to put it in a Section 115 trust and use it to maybe reduce general fund, the use of general fund for pension costs in the future, or whether it's more cost effective to send it over to CalPERS. Maybe it's not even pensions at all. Maybe it's our OPEB liability. But for right now, we wanted to make sure that we pulled it out of the general fund because the $1 million was appropriated as a part of the surplus that was achieved in 17-18, and the $750,000 was budgeted as a part of the 18-19. We wanted to make sure that we accounted for that rather than losing it as a part of fund balance when we closed the year. So I think that's something that we can bring back to council at a future point in time for consideration.
Quick follow-up. If we do a 115 trust, would we be able to use the money in the trust fund to pay OPEB costs?
No.
Okay. Thank you.
You are welcome.
Yeah. Regarding your slide 5, which is the one about the expenses and how the expenses went down by $442,995. You're with me? Mm-hmm. Okay, so one of the line items pertains to the police department, and it indicates that the police department, as I'm reading this, spent $1,839,084 less during the 2019 fiscal year than was budgeted. Am I reading that correctly?
Correct.
What was the reason for that?
I believe the reason is attributed to the vacancy factor. Prior to fiscal year 1920, the reduction in expenses for the vacancy factor was included in the non-departmental group, which is why you see the $4 million overspending, the negative number in non-departmental. In the police department, the number of vacancies that they have had, they've been achieving the cost savings attributed to those. However, ideally, as the city as a whole, we would need to save an amount equivalent to the vacancy factor that sits in non-departmental in order to be net positive. I believe for fiscal year 1920, using a vacancy factor of 8%, the police department's vacancies, the dollar value is a little over $3 million. I think it was 6% in 18-19, but don't hold me to that.
What about the issue that you and Captain Glass were discussing at the FIPAC meeting about having contracts that were budgeted, but the spending on the contracts was less than had been anticipated on the budget?
Thank you for reminding me of that. So one of the things that we've done as a city is we tend to budget the full value of the not to exceed amount of each contract. One of the contracts that we can use as an example is the contract for jail services for the police department. That is a very significant contract, I think around 800 or 900,000. But historically, over the past number of years, we've spent somewhere between 600,000 and 700,000. For fiscal year 1920, we've adjusted for that to bring our total budgeted amounts back down to where we're truly spending. But this 200,000 of this number, you're absolutely correct, is contracts that were budgeted at the full contract value, the not to exceed, rather than what we truly anticipate using. And that can be said for a number of contracts, not just in the police department, but in all departments.
Can you please turn to number 17? I just have a couple questions for Captain Glass. So regarding the L3 police car video system, so you mentioned that we don't have body cams, but we have the video system in the cars. Is it that do departments usually have either or? They have a video system in the car or the body cams, or do some departments have both?
Some have both. Some that have upgraded to the body-worn cameras have it on their person, but it also records on the vehicle. It just really depends on the direction that agency is going. Like at 1998 is when we first got in-car videos, and we were cutting edge and ahead of the game way before people. We had VHS tapes is what we used to use. So that's how early we were on. Blue VH tapes. So we had it very early on. But for us, some do have it depending on what kind of direction, policy, and procedures they have in their city.
Okay. And so if we buy the L3 police car video system, seems to me like, for $783,520 anticipated, seems to me like we're committed to the car video program as opposed to the body cam program.
So part of this of getting approval and getting the funds to move forward is that we are going to test different systems out there to see kind of direction, so we have that option and doesn't close ourselves off to growing or maybe adding that down the road. But our intent right now is to replace the system with a in-car video system. We also carry a Puma system, which is a audio recorder. So one of the things we're looking at doing is trying to incorporate everything into one, and then hopefully with the potential that we could expand depending on what direction we are going in that area.
Okay. And then if you look at the last slide I want to direct your attention to, and I'm almost done, mercifully. If you look at number 19, and so if you go through this phasing and you get to phase 3, which is 21-22 recommendation, and now you're down to $410,000. See what I'm saying? See what I'm saying?
Yeah, I see the
Okay.
410.
So it seems to me like, so we have this like grouping of costs that were raised during the most recent budgetary process by the police chief, and it was, a lot. I mean, it was millions of dollars, $3 to $4 million. And then through this phasing process, we're kind of running out those requests. But I mean, logically, I'm looking at this and I'm saying, I mean, is that a fair way to look at it? In other words, it would seem to me like as time goes on, now we're going to look at the next year, and there should be other things that we're going to need in the following year, and it's kind of a rolling basis. And it's not like you focus in on that snapshot about what our chief asked us for in June of 2019, and then you roll it out. There's new things that are going to be happening. So I'd like you to address that. And if you could address this, it's like, how did it so happen that we got this big request in 2019 as opposed to this kind of these rolling requests? How did it build up to that point, if you know? Two separate questions.
So I'm going to address it based on identifying the critical needs of the department was how it started. And we have several items that we need to do for our everyday operations. That includes those vehicles, the mobile command vehicle, these critical systems that I would say critical everyday operations or need for everyday operations, which is L3 and the MDCs. Those are big purchase items that if you see, it's over almost every 5 to 7 years they come up. 2 years ago, we actually started bringing some of these up. So I think the big over list is a grouping of this stuff over the last couple of years of here's what is needed for this organization that we would like to or need to address because of where we're going, and it's kind of been delayed already several years. So you have the list of priorities that were brought up. As we are looking, and we're working with finance and stuff, working with finance and direction, really pushing forward on what we need to address our immediate needs so we can have a systematic approach to it. And that's why we come up with a plan that we, over the next 3 years, address some of the critical systems, L3, MDCs, addressing the high priority, I believe, which is an MDC or the MCV for the city, because it's been kind of postponed, and that's for emergency operations, communications, and all that. So it's not just a little van we're driving around, but it's so we can handle a situation for the safety to the citizens in the community. So I think we've taken an approach, but the major list was a list of things the department did need and we needed to address. And I think now over some time, we've been working with finance, we've identified a plan to do that, to help us keep on moving forward. And then, as you can see, the department's made some efforts in different areas to address some of these other programs, the drone program, the Dragon software, and using different resources to help on that part too.
Right.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I'm going to say one comment, and then I have my final question that pertains to drones. But it just seems to me like it would be better. It seems to me like what occurred in the last budgetary cycle is like a lot of pent-up requests, if I could use that term. And it would be better to kind of smooth it out over a series of years, so we never have a situation where we're being requested so much in one specific budgetary session. So just for the future, I think that would be a better way to go. Now, my drone question. Will the drones be used to catch people that are blowing off illegal fireworks?
Once we get that program established, we'll have to determine what our abilities will be. But, I don't know if it'd be safe to have the drones up there with the fireworks.
It's like, that doesn't seem right.
Well, they're not manned drones.
We're going
right?
to use it. Yeah, we're
They're
going to
very
do everything we can
expensive.
with those drones, and hopefully for the safety of the officers and the community out there on a regular basis.
All right, thank you. Thank you
Okay.
very much, and I'm sorry I took so much time. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Guinness.
I do realize that you don't have the audited numbers yet, but as far as, the general fund's like half of all our money. And then we have other governmental funds, probably the biggest one being the Capital Improvement Fund, and then the proprietary funds. And I know you don't have the numbers, but do we have any idea, like, are they about where we thought they'd be, better than we thought, worse than we thought, or we have no idea at this point?
Most of the funds are about where we thought they would be. Most of our special revenue and capital project funds are sources like gas tax and traffic impact fees, sources that are fully restricted for a specified purpose. In the instances where fund balance didn't end where we thought it would, fund balance is ending higher than we thought it would, but that really just represents a delay in spending. The amount or dollar value of appropriated capital projects hasn't finished. It just means that the project itself didn't get finished when we thought it would, and it'll be spent in this fiscal year instead. We did a full internal review of the entire capital improvement program, including all funding sources. And we have accounted for every dollar, every appropriation. For the first time, our budget book, the rolled over projects matches PeopleSoft, which it hasn't in the past. That was a tremendous task between finance and public services. We had many meetings, and I thank the public services team for enduring that with us. But now we can finally run reports that are true, that have balances we can rely on. So I do feel confident that the other funds will end in a positive position. For the internal service funds, we already talked about the challenges with the equipment replacement fund. The self-insurance fund is the biggest unknown at this point, as we're pending the letters from our attorneys on pending and threatened litigation. There is some potential there for some increases, which in our self-insurance fund, we've made great strides over the past 5 or so years to reduce the deficit fund balance in that fund. There's a possibility that we may incur a loss there just because of having to accrue for potential liabilities. It doesn't mean that it's going to have to be paid out. It just means that we have to evaluate the potential. For the IT replacement fund, we're going to end in a much better place because City Council approved that transfer for the financial software and the land management system. But all of that has been spoken for. It is untouchable. It is formally committed in the CAFR. So I think the other funds are looking good with the one exception that we don't know for the self-insurance fund.
And then to clarify, our general fund, basically, we're going to end up 3.9 million down more or less, but that is solely attributable to the 4.4 million that we spent on the homeless shelter.
Correct.
And then as far as the expenses for the homeless shelter, are there more coming that will be in this fiscal year?
There are renovation costs. We are working diligently with the architect for the design for the airway property. We don't have final numbers there. It is possible that it is going to come back higher than we had anticipated, but we meet very regularly with the architect trying to get those numbers down, which is why we haven't finalized plans yet. From an operational perspective, I don't see any indication yet that the operations are going to cost more than was budgeted. Really, the test is going to be when we move into the airway property. It's very difficult to estimate utilities, for instance. I can estimate utilities of a warehouse, but we're converting a warehouse to a homeless shelter that has to be air conditioned and heated 24/7. So it'll remain to be seen what those costs will actually come back at, but we'll bring information back to council as early as possible if they're coming back different than we estimated.
And then do we have any other major expenses where we're still seeing, where say as of June 30th, and I know government accounting, you have to kind of account for all this stuff anyway, but we had a commitment or an accrual, but we hadn't actually written the check yet. Is there any are there any other significant amounts of money that will probably be coming that will be further reducing the general fund that we're aware of?
The largest of those that tend to happen is what we call purchase order rollovers, and it's just that. It's something that we had issued a purchase order for in fiscal year 18-19, but we didn't physically spend the cash. So when you're looking at budget to actuals, it looks more favorable. Finance implemented some pretty harsh rules, some very strict rules on PO rollovers over the last 2 years. They used to be in the $1.5 million range, the dollar value of POs that would roll over. I believe this year it was in the 300,000 range that rolled into 1920. So when you look at the amended budget for 1920 here, for the expenditures, I don't know if the slide is showing, this would be attachment 2, I believe. This actually already includes those PO rollovers.
And then in looking at the detail on the 602 account, the equipment replacement, last year you got us some, even without the fancy new software, you got us some printouts of what we had taken out of those accounts. And I did see there were several vehicles, but I don't know what department they went to, and a big old excavator. But there were a lot of expenses for what I would have thought were operating expenses, like gas, stationery for the maintenance yard, work boots for people. Is that appropriate out of that fund, or is it just whatever, because it's one of our internal service funds that we set up, we could spend it on whatever we want to spend it on?
That's a great question, and my answer may get a little bit technical, so I'll try not to. An internal service fund is intended to account for the entire operation of either the IT replacement fund or the equipment replacement. It really encompasses everything the fleet department does. Not only the acquisition of replacement vehicles, but also the maintenance and costs associated with those vehicles. The challenge is the cash on hand is intended to be for the replacement of vehicles only. If we spend $800,000 in a given year to maintain those vehicles, that $800,000 is supposed to be billed out dollar for dollar to the departments who are utilizing the vehicles. All of the departments have internal rent charges in our expenditures for those billings. In the past, we were not fully billing out the $800,000. We were only billing out, say, $500,000, which essentially depleted the cash that was intended to be used for the replacement of vehicles. So it is appropriate for those costs to be in this fund, but it's really the finance department's responsibility to make sure that the cash on hand is for the replacement of vehicles, and the operational side of the fleet unit, the fuel, the maintenance costs, parts, that all gets billed out to the departments who are using them.
And in the 17-18 budget, we not only had the mobile command unit, but we also had a fire truck and some other items. Were we able to at least get the fire truck, or were any of the things that were in the 17-18 budget?
I believe everything, perhaps Public Services could chime in if they have the answer, but I think everything that has been budgeted in the past has been acquired. It was only the budget going forward with 1920 that we had to reduce the number of approved vehicles. Is that correct?
And so this was a combination of, we didn't have the cash that we should have had, and then things cost more? Is that sort of the simple version?
It is. We've been, from the replacement cost perspective, say we purchase a vehicle for $50,000. We've been billing out as internal rent exactly $50,000, but when you go to replace the vehicle, it costs $55,000. So that incremental increase also helped to deplete cash. There was also a number of instances where we purchased new vehicles out of the equipment replacement fund because there was the understanding that fund balance equaled cash. So it was a misconception, and it essentially used the cash that would have otherwise been utilized for the replacement of vehicles.
And then I'm looking at page, what was it? Page 5 or slide number 5?
Slide 5.
Okay, so we see the police spent 1.8 million less than they were anticipated to spend.
Correct.
They can't just take that money and use it to buy all the stuff? That's the question.
They could have, but because of the way that the salary savings, that vacancy factor was budgeted in the past, if they had done that, we would not have ended with a $442,000 budget savings. We would have absolutely been in the negative. Because it's intended that each department is achieving I think it was 6% salary savings.
Okay, and let's see. And then the other thing is we're talking about as far as the equipment replacement fund. Is there, at the time we did the 17-18 budget, there were supposed to be some funds transferred into the equipment replacement fund to pay for the fire truck and the mobile command unit. But was that done, or was it just not done? Was there just not enough that was transferred?
To my knowledge, it was transferred.
Okay.
The cash was.
So it just wasn't enough.
Correct.
And then the question is, do we have any overage in there? Because I'm looking at all the things that we need, and I really hate to finance a depreciating asset, although I think this is a really important thing for us to implement as quickly as possible. So is there enough that we could maybe only fund a portion of this, or how does that work? And I'm looking at also, we have the homeless shelter, which we're not funding, and would we get a lower rate because that has real property as opposed to a depreciating asset? Would we be better off financing that?
So for the homeless shelter, typically governments don't finance the acquisition of property because it's already been purchased and it's been quite a bit of time between the purchase date and now. In my conversations with JP Morgan, that would not be doable at this time. We could potentially finance the renovation costs, but at that point, you're about the same from a dollars perspective. It is always the option for the council to authorize financing a smaller portion, perhaps $1 million of the mobile command vehicle. It's a best practice on the banking side to not do transactions that are too small, only because, they have to have some incentive to do it on their end. The council could always make the recommendation or give us the direction to finance a smaller portion of it. If that were the case, we would recommend supplementing that with general fund reserves instead, because we still have to purchase the whole asset.
Well, in a way, didn't we mortgage, for example, the police station with our certificates of participation?
Correct. Bonds are a little bit different than financing. That's traditionally the mechanism that governments use to either acquire or do significant renovations of a property. But it is unusual to issue bonds with such a low denomination. It would be a much larger project. Say if we had had time for the acquisition of the airway property, we could have evaluated perhaps issuing a $15 million bond and using it for the acquisition and renovation of airway. However, there were some time constraints.
Yeah, oh, definitely. And then on the 115 trust, I actually have a comment, not really a question, but 115 trust, say we send money to PERS this year, $3 million extra dollars to PERS. 2 years from now, we can't quite pay our bill. We go to PERS, but we gave you $3 million extra a couple of years ago. Does that get us anything?
It does not, but the scenario you're referring to is not setting the money aside in a 115 trust. It's making an additional payment on our unfunded liability.
Well, exactly, and that was going to be my whole point. Yeah. See, if we have a 115 trust, and we put the money in the 115 trust, and a couple of years down the road we're short of money, we can use it to make our PERS payment. Is that correct?
Correct.
Otherwise, if we just send it to PERS, we're stuck.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
But if I may add one more tidbit.
Okay.
In a Section 115 trust scenario, we don't get the reduction from our unfunded liability, where if you do make that prepayment to CalPERS, it reduces our unfunded liability, the liability on the financial statements.
Yeah, and so it just depends on if they're still using that artificial 7.5 or 7 point whatever they're using now. It might be better off in some scenarios. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councilmember Mansur.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Telford. Thank you, staff, for your presentations. A couple quick questions. And I appreciate the better than normal results in what we're reading tonight. But as you mentioned, overall, we do have almost a $4 million operating deficit. And I understand that was from primarily the homeless shelter, but it does seem that we always have unexpected things come up. And so I think it would be wise to expect the unexpected, like the costs of actually remodeling the homeless shelter and other things that we're going to be looking to purchase. So with that in mind, various people will say different things about the economy. It's doing fine, or it's a little bit slower. In the past, if I'm correct, you've mentioned to us that where we've seen 3% growth, we might see 2%, and so on. We might see 1% after a while, and then who knows, could go to zero growth. So what, in your best, what you've seen and the information you've been provided, and if you could tell us where you get that from, that we might see a slowdown, or are you still seeing a slowdown or anticipating it? I just want to have a little bit of a cautious outlook to the future and understand that a little better.
Sure. So we attend a number of economic updates every year, and they focus on various segments of mostly the private sector. Very few economists focus on the government sector. A lot of the information that we receive does come from the consultants that work with us. For instance, HDL, who is our sales tax, property tax, business license, marijuana tax. I think that's it. Consultants. From a government perspective, We don't tend to see the returns that the private sector does in any given year. We are anticipating a slowdown, but not a recession by any means. I've had recent conversations with HDL, and I've attended a couple of economic updates, and the private sector is very optimistic, which will hopefully trickle our way, because as the private sector is doing well, it means their employees are doing well, and we have hopes that their employees will spend lots of money at South Coast Plaza. However, sales tax and property tax, they don't tend to work that way. So while we are still anticipating a 2% increase in ongoing revenues, there is the potential, two potentials. Potential for one-time dollars that we didn't anticipate with sales tax, and then the potential increase that will be ongoing as a result of the Wayfair decision, which we just don't have the information on yet. I think we'll reset a little bit with sales tax when we come back at mid-year, and we'll determine what the new normal is anticipated to be at that time. From a global economy perspective, Costa Mesa Global, from all of our revenue streams, they're very cyclical in nature, but we do anticipate that we're still going to see positive returns, just not as large as we've seen in the past. We're optimistic, but we also want to be cautious because we don't want to count our chickens before they hatch. We don't want to spend the money before we actually have it.
Okay. Okay, switching gears to another issue. Mr. Taboda asked why the increase for the mobile command vehicle from 1 million to 1.5, and then I have a follow-up question on that.
Captain Glass? Oh, okay.
So one of the things that we worked closely with the police department on was reevaluating the estimates that were originally provided. That's in some of these earlier slides where you see the first column is the initial estimate from the police department, and then we have a revised column. One of the things that all departments do when they make a request during the budget season, they give the best information they have at that time, but they're not going to do a thorough analysis until the item is actually approved. They're not going to issue RFPs. They're not going to go look at detailed quotes from other organizations because we don't approve these large purchases every day. So as we started working through each item on the list, and really finance tried to gain a better understanding of what the police department's needs were, we started talking about the technology and who would be using the mobile command vehicle. In fact, you'll notice a lot of the estimates had increased from what was initially requested. And that's because we went back and we really looked at what other agencies were paying for similar products. Not just the mobile command vehicle, but the L3 police car video system is significantly higher as well. Some of that's due to delays. You know, as you wait 2-3 years, the cost of doing that project goes up. Some of it is the technology improvements that are necessary. I think for the mobile command vehicle, a big reason is because the initial estimate really anticipated outfitting it specifically for the police department. But this really is a whole city vehicle. It's anticipated to be able to respond to any kind of an event, whether it be catastrophic or whether it be operational. So outfitting it with the technology that all of the departments would need costs a little bit more.
I tend to agree with Mayor Pro Tem Stevens' comments earlier about some of this seemingly coming up all at once, some of these larger ticket items. And I know that we do this to a certain extent, but for example, if the mobile command vehicle is expected to last, I don't know how many years, 10 years?
20 years.
20 years. So just using that as an example, are we going to start putting, even though we're going to get a brand new one right now, are we going to start putting X number of dollars aside each year so that in 20 years we have the money for a new one, so we're not in a predicament where we have to borrow again? And same thing with our body cams and any number of things that we do. Can we approach our budget a little more in that direction? And I know we try to, but for some of the bigger ticket items.
I think a good practice, you know, the first 10 years will, if this financing is approved, the first 10 years would be approximately $180,000 per year to pay the lease payments or the financing payments. To be clear, this would not be a lease. We would own the mobile command vehicle outright. It's just a mechanism for financing it. Maybe what we can consider is in years 11 through 20, we take that same $180,000 and set it aside in the equipment replacement fund, so that when we do need to replace it, the funding is there. It's a little bit different when you have a financing situation, but because it is a 20-year asset, I think there's ways that we can build it in. Hopefully I'll still be here.
I would like to see more of that. And then I know Councilmember Guinness asked about the 1.8 million that wasn't spent through the PD, I think for overtime or something. And I think you mentioned, if I understand you correctly, that it was kind of folded back into the budget, so that's why we came out with it didn't have a structural deficit. So if we wouldn't have done that and we would have used it to pay, for example, for the mobile command vehicle, would it be accurate to say that, like page 3 says we ended the year with an operating deficit of 3.8 million, would we have tacked another 1.5 million to that? We would have had that much more of a operating deficit, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. Okay, one more question and then a comment about cannabis, and then I'm done. Page 6 of the staff report at the top, second paragraph, you wrote, the finance department identified a structural deficit in the equipment replacement fund. Can you explain what that means, that you identified a structural deficit? How did you find it, and what exactly that means? And is it not something we monitor all the time so we know what we do and don't have in that fund?
That was the whole explanation she just gave on the vehicle replacement fund.
Okay, I'm sorry, I misunderstood.
Yeah, that was what she was talking about.
Okay, got it.
Okay.
Okay, then my last comment then. I am also open to re-examining the cannabis issue and our tax. I know it's been mentioned sooner rather than later would be better. So my question of our city attorney or city manager, what would that, well, I know this was voted on by the voters. Does that need to go back to the voters, or can it just be handled by the council? Is that considered a minor change? And when would be a reasonable time to bring it to the council in terms of preparing the staff report and so forth for us to vote on? 2 months?
Ms. Barlow?
What is a reasonable amount of time?
First of all, I'm sure you will not say anything if it's not properly agendized, but if you can you answer that question?
We're talking about the cannabis tax. You could reduce a tax for a temporary period, usually, without going to the people, and you would want to do it on a temporary basis so that if you chose later to increase it back up, you would still be within the previously allowed amount. Otherwise, you would have to recomply with Prop 218 to change it later on. So if you went down to 2% and later you decided you wanted to be 4%, you want to make sure you give yourself flexibility to do that. With respect to the timing of bringing something like that forward, that's a function of staff, and I think the city manager might be able to answer that better. There are other issues that were raised by the speakers that are a little bit more complicated, and that we would need some direction on you before we could bring something back.
And Mayor Pro Tem and I have been working on this, and we are going to be bringing a whole variety of things back forward before the end of the year.
I'm speaking specifically to the reduction in the tax that we charge, the 6%, and reducing it to X number of dollars. So yes, I would like to be on record to officially ask that it do come back to us relatively soon, by the end of the year or shortly after the new year, and that we could vote on it either temporarily and ask that a more permanent solution be brought before the voters if necessary. Thank you.
Councilmember Morris?
Thank you. So that's a good segue, actually. So I think tonight was the first time I had heard for a call across the board for a tax reduction. I know I've had conversations suggesting just a distribution business tax reduction. So I guess I'm a little bit curious about that and look forward to conversations to clarify in what ways we would reduce the tax, because it seems like those are very different businesses, manufacturing versus distribution. Okay, on code enforcement, so if we take 3 part-time employees and make them 2 full-time employees, how many code enforcement officers do we have total right now, Ms. Lee?
So I don't have the total number in front of me, but about 50% of our staff is part-time.
Okay, so if we were to take those 2 of those employees and make them full-time, we wouldn't be getting rid of that 3rd position. They would continue in a part-time capacity.
Correct.
Okay. And then the other question I had for you was, so similar and related, I know we've got an economic development plan in the works. As we look at the proportion of our revenues that come from sales tax versus TOT versus anything else, I think it would be helpful for the council to look at that in the context of how we think our economic development base might grow in general across the city. Because obviously, as we've heard, not all businesses generate the same tax revenue. So I'm not sure, do we have a timeline on when we expect to see that economic development plan?
We do. We've had a variety of priorities over the last few years.
I know you've been busy.
That have moved, that have moved that around on our priority list. But we do have a project schedule. We intend to finish it up before the end of the fiscal year.
Oh, okay, good, thank you. On vehicles, okay, so not to beat the vehicle replacement fund to death, but I am curious, how many total vehicles do we have in the city? And I know we rent them occasionally too, because I see that on the warrant. Mr. Sitharaman, you look like you might know the answer.
Madam Mayor, Councilmember Mar, I need to review on how many exactly vehicles we have. We do rent some of the vehicles that PD uses for undercover officers and stuff, but very few are actually leased like that. I would say less than 10. Okay. Most of our vehicles are our own vehicles.
So separate and apart from the vehicle replacement plan, do we have a policy that calls for replacing vehicles at a specific interval or mileage?
As staff, when we evaluate vehicles on a yearly basis, and we recommend vehicles for replacement that we know are require a tremendous amount of money to repair, or which we consider pretty much as a total loss. But then we do get requests from other departments during our budget cycle, and that's for when they consider their vehicles to be it's time for replacement. So we evaluate that also, and we bring it to City Council. So we give the whole list, including the department recommended list, as well as what we receive from other departments on what they think should be replaced, and go through the process. So sometimes you see vehicles that are being replaced are not, we didn't call for it to be replaced, but we still see that council approves them to be replaced.
Okay. So there's an annual evaluation process?
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to Councilmember Mansour's point, it would be, I feel like there's an opportunity to do a little bit more planning and be a little bit more strategic in terms of a policy that calls for us to either replace vehicles at a regular interval, or those that have very low mileage consider leasing if we think it's cost effective. I don't know, Ms. Telford, am I out on a limb here, or is there an opportunity to potentially be more efficient and cost effective?
Just again, Madam, just one thing on the replacement. There is one set of criteria for safety vehicles.
For sure, yeah. I'm not talking about the 17 police vehicles right now, yeah.
So when we evaluate our non-safety vehicles, we pretty much try to maximize their service life as much as possible. We don't have a cutoff on mileage or age.
Right.
We want to make sure that as long as it's repairable and it's within reason, we'll still recommend it to be continued to be in service. So we don't have a cutoff on that.
Okay.
But Kelly can.
If I may, I absolutely think that there's an opportunity for us to look at our complete list. It's not just vehicles, it's equipment as well. Equipment that maintenance uses when they're out in the field. We have I think we purchased a new Vector last year. It's not just operational vehicles. But there is an opportunity to plan ahead for that. That's what the equipment replacement fund was intended to do.
Right.
I think we need to address the cash shortage first and try to make a plan for the highest needs up front, and then look at how we can systematically replace from there on out. It's going to be a much larger project that finance is going to have to undertake during this next budget cycle. We didn't identify the issue until, I don't know, maybe 2 months into the budget process last year, which kind of tied our hands because, you know, we were working our tails off trying to get that budget produced. But we will be looking into that during this cycle.
Okay. I asked that also in the context of there's a lot happening at the state level in terms of fleet vehicle replacement, looking for higher MPG vehicles, electric vehicles for those that don't travel very far. This is kind of a hot topic as it comes to energy and sustainability as well. On the mobile command vehicle, just real quick, timeline-wise, if we're not approving the $220,000 for the storage bay until next fiscal year, does that give you time to get it built by the time you've got to put the vehicle in the storage bay? It seems like we should be approving that in this fiscal year.
No, we expect by the time we get the financing and paperwork going and the signatures done and get that approved, it'll probably take at least 6 months to get the full MCV built out. So we see it being and receiving it in the next fiscal year where we can focus on that other part of it for the build out.
And that can be a project that Public Services takes on early in the fiscal year. We've even talked about a couple of different temporary options for not necessarily housing, but covering the mobile command vehicle if there was a delay. So we'll discuss those options during budget development and make sure we have a sound solution.
Yeah, I'm just thinking that's maybe something we put out to RFP with the understanding we're not spending the money until the new fiscal year, but we're ready for it. So
if council were to approve the financing in December, by the time we got through the paperwork, got everything signed with JP Morgan, we're probably looking at being at a place maybe in March where we would actually be able to pull the trigger and place the order. So you're looking at maybe a September delivery timeframe, which should give Public Services ample time if it's approved to at least begin the project, and hopefully maybe it's only a couple months that it wouldn't have a storage bay.
Okay.
Anything else?
Yes, just for the public's clarity, my understanding is that the drones are to be used for expediting the investigation of traffic accidents in particular. Is that right, Captain Glass?
Yeah, so drones also give us so many resources that we could do out there. It could be used for traffic and doing accidents and graphing all that. It could be used for perimeter officers to see an area, the parks or something that we potentially couldn't see just on foot and get better access. So I think the ability and the different options that we're going to have with the drone program is going to be unlimited for a while, and it's going to really help us out as a force multiplier in the field.
Do we now have to go get a bunch of people trained and licensed and able to operate drones?
So, Councilmember Mar, we've already started that. So we have some individuals that have pilot licenses already who volunteered and jump on that part of the training already. And then we have several other officers we identified. So our intent is, and what we already started, is to have a good, solid group of individuals in the department that could be called upon during that situation.
Good. Okay, one more question and then I'm almost done. So look, does HDL also...
I'm almost done.
Caught that. Okay, so HDL, I'm trying to go faster. Do they also do our TOT estimates?
They do not.
Who does our TOT estimates?
Me.
Got it. Okay. So just looking back on the last couple of budgets, it is all over the place. We were at 4.5 million during the recession, then we jumped up to 7, and then we were at 8, then we were 8.5, and then we were at 9.6, and now we're kind of back to 9. I understand that the hotel business is cyclical as folks go through renovations, et cetera, but at first I was like, oh man, we're really reducing what we expect to receive, and it seems like it's really just a little bit scattershot in terms of what we have received for TOT over the last 10 years.
I would agree.
Okay.
And I should probably clarify, it's me for 1920.
Okay, fair enough. And then last thing, Captain Glass, you're quite eloquent about deferred maintenance in general, and I think that that's sort of true across the city, whether we're talking about critical police systems or fixing our elevators. And I've beat this drum before, but obviously our operating costs go up every year, employee costs go up, pension costs go up, and what we haven't done a great job of is recovering revenues or generating revenues to compensate for those increased costs. So you said it very quickly, but I do want to point out this last slide that says bullet number 2 is identify revenue generating measures. And so while it wasn't necessarily part of this study session, I do want to vocalize my support for the citywide fee study that I know is in progress, potentially raising TOT, which I know FIPAC has proposed before, looking at business license fees and comparing ourselves to surrounding cities to see if we're even in the ballpark, because my sense is that we're not. And pretty much anything else that you or the city manager want to propose in terms of what bullet 2 on your last slide actually means. So I look forward to that conversation in December. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Chavez.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you everyone for coming today. Most of my questions have already been answered, so I have like one left to ask, and I'll say a few comments after that. So I noticed a new ambulance program has brought in a bit more revenue than we thought it would, about $50,000 more. Do we see that as a variance that's like noteworthy, or is that just like a small variance in terms of finance?
It could be a small variance with only a short period of data available. It's hard to tell. I don't imagine it's cyclical because they really are based on calls for service. But when we come back at mid-year, we will have more data. We'll have another full 6 months, so we should be able to tell whether we're going to be on trend for it being continued. We did estimate an increase in fiscal year 1920. I believe it's 3.3 or 3.4 million. So we should have better data of whether or not we think we'll be able to achieve that revenue.
Okay, perfect. And yeah, I think as I'm hearing today in the budget review, I think we should be very pertinent in finding new ways to find revenue to incur to our general fund. I want to just repeat what Mayor Pro Tem and Mayor Foley has stated earlier, as well as Councilmember Mansour. I do believe we should be looking at the Measure X zone and seeing how we can better help out the industry. I am disappointed to see the numbers so low in their budget for potentially a gold mine of an industry that's new. I know we're doing our best to shut down illegal dispensaries, and I don't know if I can make this comment, but I'll just say it for the time being. Having seen delivery systems done by friends and other parts of this county, it's already happening, and I'm pretty sure they're not legal. So I would get on board with it, making it legal, making sure our citizens are getting proper, be tested cannabis and not some backstreet shady kind of cannabis. And I also want to repeat Councilmember Mar's point about critical data in terms of our fleets and other systems. Obviously, Member already mentioned this, but we saw last budget cycle with police chief was probably pent up and probably like building up requests that were over time being kind of pushed aside. And I think if we're trying to be responsible to our city and our department, we really should be looking at things that we can address year by year. I love the 3-year phase plan for the pertinent things that are really critical for the department. And I think we should be looking at that in really every part of the department. You know, vehicles we're using, you know, how often do we use vehicles for? You know, let's have a replacement fund for when we have time to die. You know, let's make a list of what we need to be prioritizing in terms of like cameras or things like that. Because going forward, it should be a more smoother process, just for everyone's sake. And I think that's it. I'm really grateful for Wayfair doing good work for our city, coming in clutch there. And also thankful for the luxury goods from Tacos Plaza. You know, we're really blessed to have them in our city, but like I said, we should always be looking for new revenue streams and sources.
Thank you. Okay, I actually am going to go to Councilmember Reynolds because Councilmember Stevens and Guinness have already spoken at length. Councilmember Reynolds.
I was trying to be patient to see if people would cover my questions, and I saw I was getting lapped, so I got my name in there. Okay, thank you for doing that. Okay, so first I just want to say thank you. This is a really good summary, and I really appreciate the rules and tools you're putting together to help us more closely track ongoing spending and spending according to budget. So thank you for all of that work and for all of you for, I guess, stepping up in the last quarter to really try to tighten up spending. So I'll just echo, I think, pretty much everything we've heard up here about the cannabis industry. Want to thank the industry members that came and any that are still here for sharing the challenges that they're facing. I'm interested in hearing proposals or hearing what we can do given Measure X or what we can do in general to address all of the challenges that were articulated. I think reducing the tax on a temporary basis makes sense. I think allowing delivery seems like a no-brainer, considering that it's already allowed in the city. Other businesses in other cities are allowed to deliver to our city, so why not our businesses? A few quick questions. So I recall during our budget discussions, it sounded like some of the department directors had not been working closely with TPA on grants, and I just wanted to make sure that that was happening. I guess that's not really a question, just a comment. Make sure that we've got close coordination there to pursue all of the grant opportunities. We wanted to echo, we heard a couple comments about overtime costs. So we had asked for kind of summarized and more frequent updates on legal spending. I think it'd be helpful if we also get those updates on overtime, because that was something that we had gotten, I think, surprised by in the past. So maybe at least at the mid-year review in February, if we can get an update on where overtime spending is, especially if it's above what we expect. So a question on slide 13, where you have the anticipated adjustments that you would touch base on in the mid-year. I was curious if that included any of the opportunities with the cost study. So I know you're doing this cost study. You had some estimates of, if we're truing up our fees to actual costs. Is that in those adjustments, or would that be additional? I know we haven't approved anything.
It is not.
Okay.
Any recommendations that will come out of the fee study will be included at that time. It'll likely be after we present mid-year. We're hopeful that the development impact fees might come at mid-year, but it's more likely to come maybe March timeframe for all of the fees together, and we would make the adjustment at that point in time.
And do you recall you had some very preliminary and subject to change estimates of if we were truing up to actual costs, what that range could be on an annual basis?
You would probably see somewhere in the 30 to 40% increase in revenues for those particular items. It would probably be a couple $1 million. The challenge, though, is not all of them are business driven. A lot of our fees are participation type fees through Parks and Rec or some of the programs that we offer. We're also asking that our consultant look at those fees, provide us with full cost recovery, and then allow us to make some recommendations of somewhere. We don't necessarily expect full cost recovery for those, but maybe a smaller increase.
Okay, thank you. Our economic development plan, will that include, or separate from that, are we also working on efforts to streamline business processes in general, not just for cannabis, help our businesses get up and running sooner?
Yes, a portion of that is addressed in the economic development strategic plan, but it's also just something that our department does very often. We're always looking at our processes and determining ways that we can make things run more smoothly and faster for our applicants. So it's a little bit of both.
Sure. Okay, good. Thank you. And then last, just comment, I want to echo what Councilmember Marr said about being interested in just a really broad look at all ideas. Nothing's too crazy for us to consider and discuss in terms of potential opportunities for revenue generation. Thank you.
Okay. Councilmember Guinness?
I have a few questions that I missed the first time around. Slide number 8. Oh, and by the way, thank you for having numbers on the slides. It's very helpful. Declared disasters, we have 14.1 million that we have on our committed column for declared disasters. That number's been fixed for a couple decades. Do we think that's a good number still?
That committed for declared disasters, I believe, was established by an ordinance in 1989, I believe. What Finance has been working with the Finance and Pension Advisory Committee, looking at all of our fund balance policies. We've made the commitment, we mean the Finance Department has made the commitment to the Finance Committee that in the coming months, we will be bringing back some recommendations on how to address general fund reserves, how to talk about, or how to address the 55 million fund balance policy that we've recently been speaking about, What I would probably say is likely is that maybe we have some adjustments to the declared disasters, as well as the economic piece. You know, self-insurance, this commitment was established before the self-insurance fund was established, so it may not necessarily need to stay there. We're going to look at all of the fund balance commitments and bring back recommendations to the Finance Committee, and then we will ultimately make the recommendations to council to address all of this, because it hasn't been touched in a number of years.
Fairgrounds. The revenue, year after year after year, the revenue to the fairgrounds seems to go up and up and up and up. But our revenue from items from sales tax from the fairgrounds is pretty stagnant and has been for a long time. And I know we were working with them to try to make sure that everybody, all of their vendors had Costa Mesa business licenses and stuff so we could get our appropriate sales tax. How are we doing on that?
It has been slow going. They have had a number of changes.
Yeah, I know.
Over at the fair, personnel-wise. We were working with I think the title is VP of Finance. He's no longer there. I believe they have a new one. We were working with their CEO, but as we approached fair time, it became very challenging because of the time commitment on their part.
And now she's leaving.
We have made a lot of improvements. One of the challenges is understanding revenues that the fairgrounds generates separate from revenues that vendors generate at the fairground property. We don't receive sales tax from the fairgrounds themselves, at least not enough to measure. We receive the sales tax from the vendors who operate at the property. We've worked with them to educate the vendors. They are now going to be including the requirement to list the unique tax identifier, the sales tax ID number, on their contracts. We will have continued conversations as the new CEO comes in to try to make even further strides, but it's been a challenge, I would say on both sides, on our side as well as theirs, just because it's an immeasurable task. And with the limited resources we've had, we've done quite a bit, but we can still do a little bit more.
Okay, I'm glad to see we're making some progress in that regard. We've talked a lot about the structural deficit in the equipment replacement fund, but in our most recent budget, we had a 5-year projection which pretty much showed we have a structural deficit in our overall financial picture, regardless of what happens with the economy. We seem to be consistently spending more than we take in. And we did take some measures to raise fees and take some other steps. But are we looking at other steps to reduce that structural deficit? Do we have a more current 5-year forecast? I know we don't have it now because you guys have been just without current software. I mean, this is amazing that you got what you got, what you gave us here. But is our 5-year financial forecast still looking grim?
So we haven't done a full reforecast. We're actually in the middle of working on it right now. We do anticipate either in early calendar year 2020 or as a part of the mid-year, bringing it back to council to review. We do think we're going to be in a little bit better of a position, but that's being very cautious. Even though sales tax is projected to increase, you saw the slide that showed possible adjustments at mid-year for revenues. Even though sales tax is projected to increase, there are some other challenges with some of our other revenue streams that may decrease, so that the net change is not significant. We have rising personnel costs. We have rising utility costs. We have a pretty sizable unfunded liability for pensions that I know the council is wanting to begin addressing. So we do have some challenges, but we are committed, the finance department, the city manager's office is committed to bringing options, whether they're palatable or unpalatable. We want to bring all possible options to council for consideration so that you guys can give us direction on where you think we should focus our efforts. And I think it'd be a really good idea for the FIPAC committee to assist us, especially because of our limited resources, in really trying to evaluate, as community members, what the community would be open to as well.
And then a couple of housekeeping things. You indicated that our audited numbers should be ready in the first couple of weeks of December. And so I'd just like to request that we could get a copy of the CAFR before we go away for the holidays so that when we have downtime, we could be pouring through the numbers as opposed to getting it 2 days before we have a hearing in January. Because, that's my holiday reading.
Sure. So last year we issued the audited financials. I think we issued December 29th or December 30th. It was right there on the cutoff. We're on track to be able to issue the first week of December. So as soon as they're issued and printed, we'll make them available not only to the council but to the community as well.
And then also, we've had several things that we said we wanted to come back by the end of the year. And I just wanted to make sure that we didn't have anything that would be, and I know the best laid plans, things just don't necessarily work out. But I would like to make a request that if there's something that we think is going to be pretty controversial, that we not do it at the December 17th meeting when everybody's sort of busy with the holidays, because that's all it does is foster resentment in the community then.
The only items that I would
Everyone's busy
anticipate.
all the time, but go ahead.
The only items that I would anticipate bringing before council are the items before you tonight, which would be the recommendation for the year one or phase one for the police department's requests, as well as the 2 staffing changes for development services and the IT department. There would be no surprises.
Okay, good. Because I've already heard complaints. They're having a meeting the week before Christmas, and that's just because there's something they want to slide through. And I'm like, I don't think so, but.
No, we're trying to get the work done so that we can keep moving. Mayor Pro Tem Stevens.
So I just, I got right into my questions and stuff, and I didn't thank you for all the hard work that you've done and all the department heads and everybody who worked on this, and the presentation was excellent. And I know Kelly's been working very hard on it, and thank you in particular, Captain Glass, for being so collaborative with the finance department. I think that's really a breath of fresh air, and the information that you gave to us was very understandable and thoughtful and logical, and I appreciate that. The other thing is I wanted to commend also the FIPAC, who we went through this with the FIPAC committee, and I always get a lot of good comments from that committee and Mr. Tabota in particular, so thank you for that. And finally, I just want to say, as my parting shot, is to thank the council, because I think there are really 2 decisions that we've made recently. The budget process was I don't know what's the adjective I'm looking for, tense or something like that. I don't know, challenging. That's probably the better way to put it, the more diplomatic way. Thank you, Kelly. But when we made that decision to have this meeting, out of situations like that sometimes comes really good processes, and so we made the decision to have this meeting to defer these items that were requested by the police department and the other items that were requested, and to look at them at this point in time. And I think that was a really wise decision by the council. And I think that this is could be a good thing to do every year, actually. It's been a very helpful study session. And then finally, we made a decision, of course, at some point in time to hire our city manager, Lorianne Farrell Harrison. And one of the reasons we did that is because of her background in finance. And I think that you and the city manager, Kelly, or Ms. Telford, are a good team when it comes to finance. And she's had that position before with much larger agencies, and she's been described by a Huntington Beach council member, who I'm not going to name publicly, but as a financial genius. And so we're lucky to have her, and I don't think we could pull any of this stuff off without her leadership. So thanks to the council for making that decision.
Okay. Well, all of my questions were answered. That's the good news. Is there anything left to talk about? I don't think so. Let's see. But I did have the only question that was not answered related to the personal protective equipment. So my question is that something that we need to just get done and buy now? We don't want to put our officers at risk.
So the officers are not at risk.
Okay.
Again, those suits were for a chemical or biohazard situation. And it was an initiative that was countywide back in 2009. And so that's where we're kind of reassessing and seeing what other agencies are doing for that.
Okay, so we're not worried about that.
We're not worried about it. We still have the gear. It just is coming due for that. It's all hitting expiration, and
Okay.
we're evaluating best practice.
Okay, thank you. I echo everything that Mayor Pro Tem Stevens just said, and I'm very appreciative of all the hard work. I know that we not only are putting together budgets and collaborating amongst departments and everyone's jockeying for funds, that's hard enough in and of itself, as well as like the stakeholders in the community and you know, departments against department. And so that's hard. That's hard work already. But on top of it, we have archaic technology. And so you can be sure that's a priority for us, and we want to give you all the tools that you need, tools being resources at this point, to be able to get that transition going so that you can be more efficient, it doesn't take as long, life will be better for everyone, I think. So thank you for slogging through. But I did want to make a couple comments because I am pleased with the study session presentation and obviously the numbers. And this has been, I think, a really good exercise for us. Truing up the numbers and seeing the budgets to actuals is something that I think I've been wanting to do for the entire time that I've been on the city council. So hooray, we're doing it, and it just took the right people being at the right place at the right time. So thank you both. And then also really glad that we're continuing to be cautious and conservative in terms of our fiscal approach. I think that we're known for that here. I like to say fiscal, frugal but functional. But in this case, I think it's more than frugal but functional. It's also we are providing excellent public service, and we're increasing our staffing to meet the needs of our community, which is critical. We all know that. We had gotten to numbers that were incredibly low, and that's why we're behind, frankly. And we're continuing to improve in terms of public services, in terms of public safety, response. We're dealing with a lot of dynamic issues in public safety. And so the more people and the more resources that we have to address those needs is important, and we have to invest in that. I think this council is ready to do that and already has. We also are improving the quality of our infrastructure. I mean, we've invested in the last year, and we're continuing to invest in this budget cycle in some major infrastructure projects, and that improves the quality of our community. And that also takes resources in terms of bodies and time. And so they're all connected. We can't have good public service, good public infrastructure, a quality community without having the people to do the work to make that happen. We don't sell widgets. We provide services. So I think everyone knows I appreciate that, and I appreciate all the hard work. And, we've gone through some lean times. We've gone through some good times. I think we're sort of stabilizing now, and I like to know how, make sure you're telling us how can we be more stable? How can we stabilize in terms of our economic development, in terms of our, allocation of resources and time? That's a priority for us all. So it's good news that revenues are up and expenses are down. Let's stay on top of it and continuing to track like we're doing. I really think that's the key, is to track it so that we don't end up at the end of the year and, $1.8 million that no one knew was still sitting there. And yeah, it's great, we saved it, but maybe we could have spent it on something that we needed, And also, I'd like to see us target, as everyone knows, reducing the litigation. I think investing in our advocacy through Towns and Public Affairs and through our relationships with our assemblywoman and our congressman and getting the sober living home reform, that's going to save us millions of dollars. Just getting the law changed will save us millions of dollars. So we really need to, I think, prioritize that in this next legislative cycle. And then targeting in terms of the luxury goods, it's great. We're going to have come online that we haven't really talked about. The Audi store is coming online on Bristol. And that's going to provide a huge increase in our sales tax on luxury cars that we didn't have before. So looking forward to seeing what those numbers look like. The plans that I've seen for the store and heard about seem like they're going to be doing some pretty high volume of sales. So that's nice. And then also grants. I'll echo some of the comments by Councilmember Reynolds that we have an opportunity to do grants. I mean, I think the mobile command vehicle is a great opportunity to get some grants that are available, especially if we're going to be using it for, you know, all city kind of a use. So let's target those grants because that's a way that we can offset our budget. And I know I'm not telling you something you don't already know. One of the comments I did want to make also, one of the reasons why we also saw a little bit of a downturn in the tourism, frankly, is because of the national conversation about immigration. And I sit on the Travel Costa Mesa board, and we've had many discussions about this. We've actually redirected our priorities in terms of marketing with Travel Costa Mesa to target neighboring cities and areas like San Diego, LA, Ventura, Arizona, places not too far to travel, San Francisco, because there is a difficulty in getting travelers from what we had been seeing from other countries. And it's harder to come to stay here now in this country. So that's going to be something that we need to stay on top of. And I do think maybe you could talk with Ms. Lombardi-Fries at Travel Costa Mesa and sort of just get an overview on what's happening in that market, because they're doing some really good work and they have some ideas how to increase our heads in beds, as they say. Okay, well, that's all I have. Thanks to everybody for your hard work and your questions and your comments, and thanks to the community for coming out tonight. And we will close the meeting and adjourn the meeting until our City Council meeting of next Tuesday. Thank you.
Yeah. Are we allowed to applaud?